I'll tell you something that's going to get me in trouble, but I couldn't care less. The radicals on the right oftentimes are radical because they don't want to see crime. The radicals on the left are the problem, and they're vicious, and they're horrible, and they're politically savvy. Do you agree with the president?
I don't speak for the president. The president speaks for himself.
Do you agree with the president?
I don't. On what matter?
On the question that I just asked, do you agree with his statement about the radical left?
That there's ideology that's driving violence on both sides? Yes, that's what he acknowledged.
No, he didn't. He didn't. Okay. But I'm glad that you're saying that and actually creating some separation between you and the president. And I'm glad that you are acknowledging that there is violent extremism on both sides.
Lady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director, for coming here today. And actually, thank you for your response to my colleague from New York who asked you earlier about violent extremism, and you said that there is violent extreme ideology on both sides, and I think you actually alluded to that same statement yesterday in the Senate. So I too have some questions I'd like to ask you. These are not gotcha questions, and just deny, please, what you deem to be false. So Dylann Roof, who followed white supremacist propaganda, murdered 9 black parishioners in Charleston in 2015. Do you deny this?
I'm sorry. Dylann Roof?
Roof?
Roof. Can you give me some more information?
You're head of the FBI. You probably know this. If you don't know, that's fine.
You can give me a reminder. I've got a lot in front of me.
It was national news. Robert Bowers murdered 11 Jewish worshipers in Pittsburgh in 2018.
I do remember that.
And it was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack. So do you admit that that happened?
I'm not saying the other thing didn't happen. I'm just asking for a little information.
Patrick Cruces, who posted a manifesto about a Hispanic invasion, walked into a Walmart in El Paso, Texas in 2019 and began firing. He murdered 23 people that day, and the youngest was 15. Do you admit or deny that that happened?
I'll take your presentation as accurate.
All right, well, I have to say all of these cases have been adjudicated. As I said, they are not gotcha questions. These incidents were national news. And as director of the FBI, you have access to all of this information. So in 2022, Peyton Grendon walked into a supermarket in a black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, and started shooting. He murdered 10 people that day. And on September 10th, your friend Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Tyler Robinson has been taken into custody and charged, but also on that day, Desmond Holley, a 16-year-old white male, shot and injured 2 students at a high school in Colorado before killing himself. And according to the Anti-Defamation League, he had a fascination with mass shootings and white supremacy. So do you admit to, deny these facts?
Those happened.
Okay. Your predecessor, former FBI Director Christopher Wray, said that one of the most dangerous concerns is that racially motivated violent extremism, especially white supremacists, has been the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism cases and is responsible for the most lethal attacks over the last decade. Do you admit or deny, A, that he said this?
I'll let the record reflect that. Whatever he said was what he said.
All right, and do you agree?
That there is racially motivated crimes being committed in America, yes.
Yes, especially white supremacists, which is the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism. I'm glad that you said this. So last week, President Trump was asked if there were extremists on both the left and the right. He was actually asked this by Fox and Friends, and his exact words were, "I'll tell you something that's going to get me in trouble, but I couldn't care less. The radicals on the right oftentimes are radical because they don't want to see crime. The radicals on the left are the problem, and they're vicious, and they're horrible, and they're politically savvy." Do you agree with the president?
I don't speak for the president. The president speaks for himself.
Do you agree with the president?
I don't. On what matter?
On the question that I just asked, do you agree with his statement about the radical left?
That there's ideology that's driving violence on both sides? Yes, that's what he acknowledged.
No, he didn't. He didn't.
Okay.
But I'm glad that you're saying that and actually creating some separation between you and the president. And I'm glad that you
are
acknowledging that there is violent extremism on both sides. What's interesting is that the research arm of the Department of Justice, the National Institute of Justice, do you know what that is?
I'm familiar with them.
Okay, great. It is the research arm of the Department of Justice, and it published an article in 2024 devoted to domestic radicalization, violent extremism, and terrorism. I have it. It's interesting that it's no longer on the website. It has been scrubbed, but I ask these questions because what makes a strong, qualified director of any business, of any household, of the FBI, what makes a reputable prosecutor is not lapdog loyalty, but a commitment to the creed that evidence is agnostic and that the evidence will lead you to making the right decisions. And your job, no one's job is to like the data or the evidence, it is to collect it. That is how you gain trust. And Mr. Chair, I would like to enter into the record, if I may. White supremacist group stands by racist ideology with unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Dylann Roof, the radicalization of the alt-right and ritualized racial violence.
Without objection.
Thank you. Another article, how Robert Bowers went from conservative to white nationalist. I'd like to enter that into the record with me.
Without objection.
Patrick Cruces believed he was fulfilling Trump's wishes in El Paso attack, his attorneys said. I'd like to enter into the record.
Without objection.
Buffalo shooting, how far-right killers are radicalized online. I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
Evergreen high school shooters' online activity reveals fascination with mass shootings, white supremacy. I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
Murder and extremism in the United States in 2024, a report by the Anti-Defamation League. I'd like to enter that into
Without
the record.
objection.
And the article, the report that was scrubbed from the DOJ just recently, National Institute of Justice Journal focusing on domestic radicalization, violent extremism, and terrorism. I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
And lastly, the libertarian think tank Cato and their analysis on violent extremism and the right rising in extremist acts. I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
When your FBI director wiggles when asked about Dylann Roof or Robert Bowers, that's not a small stumble. Those names are anchors in modern American history. 9 black parishioners murdered in Charleston, 11 Jewish worshippers gunned down at the Tree of Life synagogue. And when a congressional hearing forces the director to treat them like trivia, it's a red flag about institutional memory and priorities. The exchange in today's hearing was calm and surgical, but the implication was enormous. The people who run our counterterrorism apparatus must know these cases cold, because those cases tell us what the real threats look like. Sydney Kamlager-Dove didn't come to grandstand. She came with a list. Charleston, Pittsburgh, El Paso, Buffalo. Each name a community that lost people. Each case tied to white supremacist ideology or online radicalization. That roll call isn't a political litany, it's a pattern. The killers arrived at those targets after being fed violent conspiracy, grievance, and dehumanizing narratives online. When the FBI director hedges or pauses on those facts, it buys time for deniers and helps cover the real vectors of radicalization. Kamlager-Dove did something smart in that moment. She insisted on evidence. She repeatedly framed the conversation around adjudicated cases and published reports. And she entered sources into the record, because a functioning security apparatus must be driven by data, not talking points. Saying there's extremism on both sides is an answer that sounds reasonable until you follow the data. The data, across multiple studies and case histories, show that racially motivated far-right violence has produced many of the deadliest domestic attacks in recent years. When a leader refuses to name that trend, it's not neutrality, it's refusal. So let's unpack what that actually means. In plain terms, radicalization is rarely instantaneous. Even the so-called lone actors tend to follow similar paths: intense online consumption of extremist content, steady reinforcement through closed forums, and a drift from grievance to justification to action. The internet doesn't create motive out of nowhere, but it accelerates radicalization by normalizing fantasies of violence and by offering a community that applauds it. That means prevention isn't just about more guns at checkpoints or more arrests after the fact. It's about cutting off the pipelines, the forums, the recruitment channels, the influencers who turn grievance into action. Federal law enforcement has to map those pipelines and work with tech platforms, researchers, and local communities to interrupt them early. The failure to do so, or to admit they exist in the measurable way the evidence shows, leaves communities vulnerable. There's also an institutional angle Kamlager-Dove pointed to. Research bodies inside the Department of Justice have produced critical work on domestic radicalization. When those resources are minimized, removed, or scrubbed, it creates a knowledge gap that bad actors exploit. Policymakers and law enforcement must have access to the full evidence base to build effective interventions, community resilience programs, targeted disruption of violent networks, and tailored countermessaging. Kamlager-Dove's decision to enter journal articles and reports into the congressional record was a deliberate push to keep that evidence in play, not buried. But there's another, deeper problem Kamlager-Dove exposed: the politics of perception. When leaders insist that violence comes equally from ideological extremes on both sides, it flattens motives and obscures who is actually being targeted. That matters to survivors and to communities that feel the threat. For example, the El Paso shooter targeted Latinos and explicitly echoed xenophobic language. The Buffalo shooter targeted a black neighborhood. The Charleston killer targeted a black church. The Pittsburgh attacker targeted Jewish worshippers. Those patterns aren't abstract. They're about who is threatened and how law enforcement should focus resources to protect vulnerable communities. Treating all political violence as symmetric makes those distinctions vanish and undermines trust. Kamlager-Dove's line that evidence is agnostic is worth repeating. Effective counterterrorism depends on following evidence where it leads, not bending it to serve a narrative. That means FBI leadership must be able to say plainly, this is what the data show, and then act on it, whether that requires more community programs, more targeted investigations, or new legal tools to address online radicalization. When the director hedges instead, it signals either a lack of data-driven leadership or a political calculation that leaves communities exposed. Let's be practical about what should change. First, the FBI needs to rebuild its institutional capacity to track ideologically motivated violence by investing in analysts and community liaisons who understand the cultural contexts of targeted groups. Second, there must be better, faster information sharing between federal, state, and local authorities so that clues, social media signals, manifestos, travel patterns are turned into prevention, not just after-the-fact investigations. Third, researchers and the DOJ's own publication channels should be protected from political interference so practitioners on the ground can base decisions on peer-reviewed evidence rather than on what's politically convenient to say in a press release. When Kamlager-Dove entered those materials into the record, she was helping create the kind of shared evidence base that agencies need to do their job well. This hearing also has a human face, and that's crucial. These are not academic hypotheticals. Survivors, grieving families, and whole neighborhoods carry the psychic toll of these attacks. The trauma of the Jewish families in Pittsburgh, the bereaved families in Charleston, the children and parents in Buffalo, the El Paso community rebuilding after mass loss. When committee members like Kamlager-Dove force the director to confront those names and facts, they're demanding that policy reflect those human costs and that the people who hold power remember them. That humanization matters because it reframes security not as an abstract national statistic, but as the safety of people at school drop-off lines, in houses of worship, at grocery stores, and at community gatherings. This was not just an exchange about memory or semantics. It was a test of whether the FBI will be oriented to follow evidence and protect the most vulnerable, or whether it will allow ideology and political convenience to dictate whose suffering matters. Sydney Kamlager-Dove's questioning forced that choice into the record. The question now is whether we, as a public, will insist on the answer. If you think evidence should guide policy and that communities at risk deserve better than spin and deflection, then don't let this moment pass. Subscribe to The Liberal Lens for sustained coverage that follows these stories beyond the headlines. Support the channel on Patreon if you want longer investigations, source documents, and reporting that keeps pressure on the people in power to act on what the evidence shows. We'll keep digging, and we'll keep bringing the receipts, because public safety shouldn't be optional or partisan.